freedom of speech, once the core value of democracy and journalism, now is being discussed and probably redefined as well. And to talk about that, here is my guest, Alastair Donald, the advocate of the freedom of speech, but also the core organizer of the Festival of Battle of Ideas. Hello.
Hello.
Where was this turning point in the last decades that we thought, maybe we need to redefine the idea standing behind the freedom of speech?
I think for the last 2 or 3 decades there's been slowly surrender of interest, of defending the values of free speech, especially in Western societies. I think it's important to remember just how central freedom of speech has been in Western countries. You've gone through centuries, really, of the development of ideas by great thinkers and philosophers, of toleration, of autonomy, of liberty, and the struggles that took place to make them the property of society, which they eventually did become. And they really did become part of the self-image of Western societies, I think. And even in the Cold War period, for example, Western societies defined themselves against Eastern societies by virtue of the fact that they were the ones that believed in freedom and were willing to embrace freedom of speech. So I think from the 1990s onwards, we've slowly seen perhaps some complacency in the way that we thought about the value of free speech. But I think slowly in recent decades and years in the 21st century, really a complete surrender of the value of it and a change from thinking of it as a virtue into thinking of it something that actually is a little bit of a problem. And I think if you listen to the discussions these days around free speech, then there's just an anxiety about it and a sense that actually this is something a little bit dangerous. It can be harmful to people. It can be hurtful. In politics, it creates things like misinformation, which society can't deal with. And I think those are the indirect ways that free speech is undermined, because these things are boosted up the agenda to take primary importance, and free speech then becomes a secondary value that's only acceptable if some of the other things don't happen. And I think that's the real problem that we're dealing with just now.
You said 1990 might be this moment where the things start shifting. And that was also the moment when the Iron Curtain fell down. So the Western that was this area of freedom of speech could actually give many examples for those countries like Poland. But what happened that you are actually saying that was this moment?
Yeah, it's interesting. I went to the Solidarity Museum last time I was in Poland. Brilliant museum, fantastic exhibition. And it was really interesting to see how crucial freedom of speech was in that environment.
The major thing, fighting for freedom. And we've seen so many people landing at least in jail for giving newspapers or writing.
Yeah.
So that was the core idea, to fight for freedom of speech, right?
Absolutely.
So what did happen?
Well, I think there's probably 2 things that we could say, two important developments. One is cultural and one is a bit more political. So on the cultural one, I think we've moved from the way that we view individuals as quite robust and resilient, which, in the times when we valued free speech, you did tend to think of individuals as being capable of engaging with difficult ideas and having arguments and being able to respond to ideas that they didn't like and to absorb a little bit of criticism in a way. That was the whole deal with free speech over the centuries, as it happens. I mean, free speech accompanied the emergence of normal people into society as full being members of that society who would have a say in determining the future. And I think in the last 20, 30 years, we've developed a very different idea of what individuals are. We now seem to think of them less as resilient and more as quite fragile, as quite vulnerable, that are quite susceptible to not being able to deal with harmful speech and ideas they don't like. So that's something that's quite new, that kind of idea of the vulnerable individual. And we talk about entire groups of people these days are said to be vulnerable. And that's just not the way that we thought about people
You're
before.
like referring to all those warnings that we could see on social media, or like this policy of anti-hate speech that some of social media platforms actually implemented. Is that what you're referring to?
I think so, yes, because once you start to view individuals as fragile, then the instinct is to come in and protect them from speech that they judge to be harmful. And in fact, you actually encourage them to view as harmful as well, because that's part of what's going on here. So we've been through a situation where, I don't know quite so much about how it is in Poland, but in Britain and in America, we are now breeding generations of young people who are socialized into this idea that they're quite fragile individuals. We've got lots of people who are out there to care for their welfare. We've got in Britain armies of people who are there to support their mental health, and there's a kind of conception of people as not able to manage the difficult areas of life. And so if you teach that to young people right the way out through school, no surprise, they arrive at universities not really with an idea that they're now mature adults and they're into the world of freedom, free of their parents, and into the big university where there are other people with lots of other different ideas that they want to debate.
If I get you correctly, you're basically saying that if we won't challenge our youngsters, they won't get the proper resilience and get the critical thinking either, right?
I think that's right.
But then spreading hate or spreading such disgusting videos as we saw, where President of United States is posting on his social media account towards the protesters. I mean, where's this line right now? So maybe it's a good thing, actually, their people and their education to actually help all of those fragile people to take care of themselves in front of such a direct, actually, assault.
Well, I think the problem is that you don't help them to address that sense of fragility. You actually reinforce it because you consider them unable to deal with the world. So you might protect them from the worst of hate speech, but you don't actually help them in the long run of becoming adults that can discuss and debate things, some of which are very difficult ideas. Politics is difficult. The world we live in today is full of challenges and difficult ideas. So we need, I think, to return to a more robust model of the way that we view adults, and coming into university and then swamping them with protections, like things like trigger warnings, or saying microaggressions are banned, which are, really the kind of day-to-day, what would have been considered 30, 40 years ago, just the day-to-day things that you have to negotiate as a young person in whatever environment you're in. So I think we have to somehow get out of this moment where we consider everybody fragile, and actually to start to address that through recreating young people as mature adults engaged in the world and all its difficulties. And once you do that, then I think the discussions of harms and hate, which are predicated on the fragile model, you'd start to resolve some of those problems. So I think it's the model of the individual rather than the censoring of the harms and the hateful ideas that's the root out of this.
Right. You said obviously that this new type of treating individuals is the source, or one of the sources. What are others that we need to discuss freedom of speech? Because for me, for instance, it would be accessibility. We have access to what the person in China said, like instantly, without any verification, without any preparedness for that.
Yeah.
We can just get that. And we might not have the knowledge to accept that or to learn from that.
I think it might be linked, but it's a slightly different problem. I don't agree that there's too much information out there. And your capacity to interrogate information is a product of actually engaging with it. So this constant discussion just now about the dangers of misinformation. I mean, there's never been a time when people in societies haven't had to engage with information and work out which of it is accurate and which of it's not accurate and so on. And it's that engagement that develops your critical responses and enables you to make sense of it. So yes, we have new technologies and means of gaining that information, but you had similar discussions at times when the printing press made books widely available, or when radio and television came around. All of a sudden there was these leaps in how we engaged with the world around us, which then created new issues that we had to resolve in terms of how we interacted with it. And I very much see the internet and now artificial intelligence as yet another stage in the technological development of society that creates new things that we have to engage with. The misinformation thing, I think, is a problem because it's become a means of censoring speech these days. One of the primary means, actually, because this is, as well as the cultural change that I talked about, there's also been a political change. And I think those at the top of society just now feel very insecure in terms of their relationship with their electorates and the voters and wider society, which I think is a product of the way that politics have changed over the past 20 or 30 years. Again, since a lot of this is since the end of the Cold War. The model of discussing things in society, voting and into power an elected government, that government then representing the people's interests and taking the decisions in those interests, which gains you a measure of consent as an authority as a government. That model has broken down quite a lot over the past 30 years. And it is the case these days that lots of very important decisions are not even taken by national governments that have been voted in.
Yes.
They're taken in supranational institutions. The European Union would be a very good example of one of those, but also lots of important decisions in courts and in universities and think tanks who have the ear of politicians and encouraging them what to do, really without taking into account the wishes of the people. And lo and behold, you have the people becoming suspicious of government. You have the rise of things like populist parties who are rejecting some of the progressive, technocratic type government solutions. And you can understand then that once the people call into question governments, they're not very keen on they don't think, oh, I'm the problem. They think, oh, it's the people that are the problem.
Yes.
They've got the wrong ideas. So there then becomes a desire to shape the narratives of discussion in society, to take much greater interest in what information is available, to decide, well, that's not good information, so maybe the people shouldn't hear it. And then you have things like the Digital Services Act from the European Union, which is a very, very, very important act in terms of, and they call it a democracy shield,
yes.
But it seems to me that it fundamentally represents a suspicion of democracy and the wishes of the voters and what voters want to discuss. So that's a very important development, and I think the misinformation discussion is rooted in these kind of feelings of lacking authority in governments and their what they want to do in terms of shaping the narratives that people are engaged in. Kind of that's, in a way, what my organisation, Academy of Ideas.
Yeah, so how are you actually reaching to young generation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm involved in, I suppose, several projects at the moment. I mean, the most long-standing one and gives you an insight probably into the kind of way that we think about things. That's the Academy of Ideas, which was set up 25 years ago at the turn of the millennium. And the idea behind Academy of Ideas would be that that problem that I've just said of the public not being central to the discussion of the future of society, we wanted to address that. And we wanted to reject the idea that we've lived through the end of history and to say, actually, we have very, very big and important issues and ideas to discuss that will shape the future of society, and that the public should be central to that discussion. And so our biggest project every year is the Battle of Ideas Festival.
Right. Thank you very much for your insight. Best luck with the Battle of Ideas Festival.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.